Nature has a way of taking your best intentions and turning them into a chaotic living puzzle. So, a little over a year ago, I introduced the Creeping Primrose Willow to the lake biome. At the time, I felt like I was at a dead end, and that's because my crayfish are just relentless. They are the ultimate shredders. For years, I have tried to establish a variety of plants only to watch them get ripped apart within days. The only survivors was a pair of Amazon swords that have been holding its ground for over 3 years, but one plant species doesn't make a biome. So I was looking for a candidate that was fast growing and resilient enough to survive the crayfish pressure. I needed something that could outpace their appetite, and because I expected the crayfish to treat it like every other plant, basically an all-you-can-eat buffet, I added a significant amount of it. I wanted the plant to establish itself while it's getting eaten. The goal was a perfect self-sustaining balance between plant growth and the appetite of a growing crayfish population. I also hoped it would provide a complex habitat for the least killifish and the snails that graze on the surface area. It seemed like a solid plan, but as it turned out, the Creeping Primrose Willow had a very different plan for its new environment. The plant took hold, it grew beautifully, it created structure, and it stabilized the water column. It knocked down algae blooms by absorbing nutrients directly out of the water, it created hiding spaces for crayfish, and it gave snails and microorganisms a ton of surface area to work with. On paper, it was doing everything exactly right. But as everything looked great, things took a surprising turn. As time went on, the Creeping Primrose Willow wasn't getting eaten as readily as I had expected. Instead of a balanced grazing field, the plant established itself with shocking efficiency. It grew upwards, chasing the light, but it didn't stop there. The plant had a fascinating yet destructive growth habit. It drops root structures at every node along the stem of the plant. And as the plant expanded, these roots began to fill the entire water column. It reached a point where it didn't even look like an aquatic environment anymore. It sort of looked like as if you were peering into a cross-section of the ground, seeing it as a dense network of roots, but without any of the soil. This root mass became a nutrient trap. It was pulling everything directly out of the water column, sequestering nutrients that should have been cycling through the rest of the system. By hoarding these resources, it was effectively stalling the growth of other organisms. It did its job of creating habitat and stabilizing the water from algae blooms, but it just went too far. It didn't just join the biome, it conquered it. 6 months later, I knew I had to act, and by September 2025, I decided to try a biological intervention, a sort of plant war. And so I introduced duckweed and water spangle. These are classic fast growers that sit on the water's surface, and my logic was simple. If I could get a thick layer of floating plants to dominate the surface, they would outcompete the willow for light and pull nutrients from the top layer of the water before the willow's roots can really get a hold of them. I wanted to shade the willow out and slow its momentum, but the results were the exact opposite of what most hobbyists would expect. Usually people complain about duckweed taking over, but here it didn't even stand a chance. The reason? Raw materials. No matter how fast a plant can grow, if the nutrients are already trapped by another plant, the newcomer is stunted before it even starts. What's more, the crayfish found that these floating plants can be a delicious novel snack. They decimated the duckweed almost instantly, and the water spangle was gobbled up too, just took a little bit longer. And what's more, the willow didn't just sit by through this whole process, it responded to the light competition by quickly growing up and out of the water surface. It effectively shaded the water spangle from above, essentially counter-shading my attempt to shade it. It was a fascinating lesson in competitive biology. You really don't know who the winner is going to be until you see these organisms fight for the niche in real time. With the willow now occupying the niche of the floating plants and the water column, I realized manual removal was really going to be the only option left. But in a system like miniBIOTA, you can't just rip things out. Balance really is just everything here. I have about 2 dozen crayfish in here, now in their 4th generation. They're at a point now in their cycle where they're mating and reproducing, and this willow was their primary habitat. If I remove all of the plant mass at once, I would be stripping the system of its battery of sorts. All of the nutrients stored in the plant tissue would be gone. More importantly, I'd be risking a total system crash. Removing that much filtration and habitat could cause oxygen levels to plummet or trigger a massive algae bloom that would block out the remaining light. I knew that the removal had to be measured and I wanted to keep the nutrients in the system, but I needed to stop the plant from growing into the water column. This led me to the smoothie approach. I took the harvested willow and ran it through a blender, creating a thick, nutrient-rich green slurry. At first, I tried returning this willow soup directly back into the water column to see how the system would respond. For the organisms, it was a bonanza. The microcrustaceans and the crayfish loved having their food pre-processed for them, but as I watched the water over the next few days, I saw a warning sign already, a tiny creeping algae bloom that began to form. This is the biggest danger in a still water system like we have here. The water only circulates through slight temperature differences, and if I added too much decomposing matter at once, I would trigger a bacterial bloom. That bacteria would consume oxygen far faster than the lake could produce it, and it would create a runaway effect, which means that a downward spiral where the lack of oxygen kills off organisms, which then decompose and consumes more oxygen. It's a cascade that can literally destroy years of work in a matter of days. So I realized that grinding the plant up and dumping it back into the water really wasn't going to be the solution. I needed a way to return those nutrients to the lake, but on a much longer, more controlled timeline. So the solution was the Lakeshore. I noticed that over the last 3 years, the soil level in the lake biome had actually lowered. The settling of material was happening faster than the organisms could build it back up, so I began taking my ground up willow and laying it across the terrestrial lakeshore. Now, the nutrients stay within the miniBIOTA ecosystem, but they are released back into the water slowly, only when it rains or through gradual decomposition, and it's been incredible to watch the terrestrial side of the biome respond. Every morning, I see the hermit crabs grazing on the willow material. Even the mangrove tree crab makes its way over to the lakeshore to feed on this slurry. And so these animals, along with other arthropods, are now the primary nutrient distributors, eating the material on land and depositing the waste along the full terrestrial realm. It's been a bridge between the two realms that should produce some interesting changes across land. As I slowly thin out the willow, I'm clearing the way for the true intended inhabitant, and it's tapegrass. Tapegrass is a cornerstone of Florida's natural ecosystems, and it offers everything that the willow couldn't. It creates a meadow type of structure, which is a forest of leaves that stays rooted in the soil, leaving the water column open and navigable for the fish and crayfish. But its most important role is chemical. Tapegrass has the unique ability to take up calcium when CO2 levels are low and aid in its photosynthesis, and it will also deposit this calcium on its leaf surface, allowing snails to easily take it up. This process helps stabilize alkalinity and pH of the water, and this is crucial because lately I've noticed some shell pitting on our snails, which is a clear sign of pH imbalance. Tapegrass also produces a carbohydrate-rich slimy coating on its leaves. This provides a constant, accessible food source for microcrustaceans and snails, which I believe will help boost the snail population back to a healthy level. Tapegrass is a big plant and will grow to the surface of the water and across it, but unlike the willow, it can't live outside of the water like the willow did. And that brings me to something important. miniBIOTA was always meant to be a closed system, a world I can observe without interference. But this experience has shown me that sometimes the caretaker has to intervene at times to nudge the cycle into a steadier path. Systems don't always resolve their balance at this scale when a particular species is just overpowered for the size of the ecosystem, at least not without losing everything else in the process. By moving that willow mass to the shore, we are rectifying a year-long learning experience, literally turning a mistake into a resource. The ground-up willow is building up the terrestrial mass, allowing rain to wash those nutrients back into the lake at a pace that the system can actually handle. It's the first step in a transition from a choked, unnavigable root forest to a clean, stable meadow. I am still working towards the goal of a full closure, and so next week I'm going to seal the entire ecosystem so that it's virtually airtight for about 7 days. It will be a brief but critical test to see if this new balance can run autonomously without oxygen levels dropping too low. Once that week is up, I'll open it back up and continue the careful work of building the changes to come. Up until now, the system has remained open as I continue to eradicate the willow one measured step at a time. This transition into the tapegrass meadow won't happen all at once. It will unfold through rain events, grazing, decaying, and time. And that's where the real learning is, because at some point, a solution can become the problem, and knowing when to step in and how to gently do it might be the most important ecological skill of all. Thanks to the Patreon supporters who are helping me maintain these worlds. I 3D print the name of every patron and mount it directly onto the door of the biome or realm they've chosen to support. If you can support the future of this project, join our community at Patreon using the link in the description below. Thanks for being part of this observation, and I'll be sure to keep you updated throughout the journey.